Hi, this is Hans Johansson. I'm right now in Tenerife, and I made a few videos from the Pyramids Museum in Guimar here in Tenerife. It is a museum where the ancient Guanches that inhabited the islands before the Spaniards came built pyramids, ceremonial pyramid structures, and with open squares between the pyramids where ceremonies were done. And this is even accounted for in some of the Spanish chronicles of the invaders of the islands. And the museum is built up by Norwegian anthropologist Thor Heyerdahl, together with his friend Fred Olsen, who's been financing it. I think that's a fascinating and amazing museum that should be used much more and something we should use to tell the story of the ancient world. I've been talking to people in both Tenerife and Gran Canaria about this, and I see that there's a lot of skepticism. I see the reason why, because you've had 500 years of Christianity now, Catholicism, and the Catholic Church has, of course, told their story of this, and that is what is ingrained in the spine of the locals. Skepticism, they don't quite believe it, and they think it's just a pile of rocks, even though it's obviously a ceremonial structure. Things like that. So I think it's important that we communicate that the ancient world was different from what the church has told us that the ancient world was, because the church needed to destroy a lot of the knowledge that was of the ancient world and in the ancient world. I've been talking to people even in Gran Canaria that doubted if the Guanches and the Canarios in the ancient peoples of the islands knew of each other, because apparently it's like a truth that they didn't have seafaring boats, and I'm not quite sure about that, because you can do quite a bit with a canoe, and who knows what they had. Those boats or those means of transportation are gone. But something you realize when you're here in Tenerife, I'm now on the eastern slope of the Teide volcano, and you sometimes see Gran Canaria very clearly. And even in the ancient world, you would obviously be able to see, for example, fires at night. You would see the campfires, you would see the smokestack that came up, and so you would realize that there are people on the other side. And also we have to remember that in the ancient world there were multiple seafaring cultures. It's documented that the ancient Egyptians circumnavigated Africa. This is absolutely an historic fact. And then they would have sailed past the Canary Islands just out there. And all it took was for them to land and maybe take one slave or whatever. They spoke languages that were similar. So just that is just a sign that, of course, they knew of each other. And the Phoenicians, they navigated. And people in the antiquity and the ancient world, they also knew that there was land in the West, what we now call America. This has also been proven that they had knowledge of this. So there was seafaring cultures that for sure visited these islands and maybe took one slave from one island to the other. And it only takes like one contact like this over the span of thousands of years for the mythology to be kept alive, that of course we have brothers and sisters on the other islands. You can see all the islands are on good days in line of sight. So they knew, of course, of the other islands as well. So of course they knew about each other. I mean, our understanding of what they knew in the ancient world is so naive. They knew much, much more than we think. But their knowledge was of a different kind than modern sort of. We have a lexicalic understanding of knowledge that you should be able to sort of flip up a lexicon and sort of find the knowledge there. And we have, of course, also the scientific method now that we sort of try to put history and all kinds of knowledge into the scientific method. But the humanities, they don't really fit into the scientific method very well. It's not everything can be tested and proven and all that. So we discard a lot of other kinds of knowledge like mythology, knowledge like more softer knowledge. Take, for example, the map. Our modern minds are very adapted to the map, so we sort of think of knowledge of geography from a bird's eye view looking at the map. But if you've never seen a map, your knowledge of geography is more horizontal. You move through space. It's a different way of understanding geography from a top-down map-wise and from a sort of what you actually navigate. And these different kinds of knowledge are, it's not like one is right and one is wrong. It's just different kinds of knowledge. And we have to realize that there are different ways of understanding the world that we might have lost entirely as well. We have to be open for other ways to understand the world and maybe to map the world and to understand and talk about the world and all that. And in the ancient world and in antiquity, there was for sure different ways to understand this. Great knowledge about these things that we can hardly comprehend now. And also, I am convinced, and many others with me, Thor Heyerdahl, that managed the Pyramids Museum, was into that, and it's growing now on everyone. I think that there was a time in prehistory, going back to the Ice Age, we're talking 10, 11, 12, 15,000 years ago, that there was a level of advanced civilization that was lost in the cataclysmic events of the end of the Ice Age, when the world was struck by meteors that melted the ice cap, and the ice cap melted and rose, the sea level rose and took down that advanced civilization that sailed the world and mapped the world and had great knowledge that was then kept by some groups and morphed into mythology and just pieces that were remembered into the thousands of years from the end of the Ice Age, say 11,000 years ago, until history sort of, as we know it, picks up again sometime, people say in Mesopotamia, 5000 BC. But of course there was 5,000 or 6,000 years in between there where civilization, some places the civilization was kept up and knowledge was kept up, a little bit like we had through the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages. Much more recently, there was like this long period of history that is dark to us now, but of course there was knowledge, of course there was people that traveled, maybe just rudimentarily simple ways of traveling, but you know, if we go 8,000, 9,000 years ago, the lost civilization and all the knowledge of that wasn't further away than what the Bible and the Old Testament is from us now. So of course, some of this was kept through the times. So we have to realize that even here on the islands, well, the Guanches that they say genetically and come from the Berbers in the northern Africa, who were, of course, in going back many thousands of years, lighter skinned, blonde, blue eyes, much more than what they are now. They've sort of had an influx of darker blood, so that when we see them now, they look much darker than they did back in the day. And the Guanches that came over, they were said to be tall, light-haired and light-eyed, so they were like a representation of what the Berbers were maybe 3,000, 4,000 years ago. But even that is an oversimplification, because there was movement of people even before that. And I believe, as many others do, that the Canary Islands have been like, you know, we go to the Canarian Islands now to see a kind of paradise. where you can pick fruit off the trees and eternal spring winds are blowing. And that, of course, was the same in the ancient world and in antiquity, and also in that pre-civilization, the Ice Age civilization. They also wanted to go nice places, and they used these islands for just that. There is Rudolf Steiner, the German mystic and philosopher. He said that Gran Canaria, especially, was the observatory of that ancient world where they observed the stars. That's a very important, a very sort of interesting insight that he had into that ancient world. And there's so much we have to work on there and discover and raise consciousness about. And I still believe we have a big job to do, both with all the tourists and the world, but also the locals here in Gran Canaria who should have an even deeper and better understanding of where they came from. A lot of the Canarians still have Guanche blood in them, running in their veins. Apparently a lot more female than male, because the Spaniards killed off the males and kept the beautiful females. But the Guanche blood is still pumping in the veins of the Canary Islands in the Canarians. And there's identity there that we have to work to give back. I've been very fortunate this winter. I've been participating in several events, both in Gran Canaria and Tenerife, that relate to these things. And there are things to discover, things to do. And I encourage people to seek up this and to sort of develop your third eye, where you see it and you feel it and you understand how it all comes together. So thank you very much.